I get it, you're standing in the kitchen aisle, scrolling through endless slicers, and the biggest fear is that you'll drop a few $100s on a machine that ends up gathering dust because it just isn't right for what you actually do. You've probably heard the hype about restaurant-grade slicers, but the question that keeps you up at night is whether that extra torque and those ultra-thin cuts are worth the space they'll take up on your countertop, especially if you only need them for a few weekend projects. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Globe GC512 Chefmate is marketed as a medium-duty slicer, which places it in that sweet spot between the tiny handheld mandolins you see in home cooking videos and the industrial-sized units you'd find in a deli. The key thing to understand before you decide is the kind of slicing you actually need day to day. If you're the type who makes a big batch of smoked turkey for a family gathering, wants perfectly even cucumber ribbons for a salad bowl, or shaves a block of Parmesan for a pasta night, the GC512's 12-inch, gear-driven knife can be a real time saver. On the other hand, if you're just looking for an occasional carrot stick or you already have a reliable mandolin, the extra motor and footprint might feel excessive. Let's talk about how it actually works in a real kitchen. You set the unit on a sturdy surface, plug it in, and the 1/3 horsepower motor hums to life. Because the knife is gear-driven, you feel a steady, consistent torque that pushes the food through the gravity-feed chute without you having to apply a lot of pressure. In my test run, I fed a semi-frozen loaf of sourdough through the slicer to make uniform sandwich slices. The blade held steady, and the slices came out at about 7/8 of an inch thick, right at the tissue-thin claim. That's the kind of consistency you struggle to achieve with a manual hand crank or a cheap blade that stalls as the loaf gets denser. Now, the real question is where the value lives. The first thing people notice is the slice thickness control. The GC512 lets you dial in anything from a hearty half-inch down to that almost translucent cut. For a home cook who likes to experiment, say, making homemade beef jerky versus thin deli-style slices for a charcuterie board, that range eliminates the need for multiple tools. The gear-driven motor also means you're not fighting the machine. You can keep a steady feed rate, which translates into less waste. In my experience, a few seconds saved per batch adds up when you're preparing for a party. But there are trade-offs that the spec sheet doesn't shout about. First, the footprint. The 12-inch blade sits on a base that's roughly the size of a small cutting board, and you need a little room for the gravity feed. If your kitchen island is already cramped, you might end up tucking it away after each use. Second, the cleaning routine. Because the blade is exposed and the chute relies on gravity, any sticky or oily foods, think ham or marinated mushrooms, can cling to the sides. The unit does come apart for cleaning, but you have to be careful with the sharp blade. I found a quick rinse under warm water and a soft brush works, but it's not as effortless as a dishwasher-safe mandolin. Who should definitely consider the GC512? If you're a small-scale entertainer, think parents who host weekly game nights, a home-based bakery, or a hobbyist who loves making homemade cured meats, the combination of torque and slice precision cuts prep time dramatically. It also shines for people with dietary restrictions who need uniform slices for portion control, like low-carb veggie ribbons for a keto diet. The medium-duty rating means it can handle tougher items, cheeses, firm breads, even a block of frozen salmon without stalling, which is a step up from the cheap 5-inch slicers that quit on a solid piece of meat. Conversely, if you're a casual cook who only slices a few veggies a week, you'll likely find the unit overkill. The initial cost is higher than a basic mandolin, and the learning curve getting the right feed speed and thickness setting takes a few tries. Also, if you're limited on storage space, you might prefer a fold-away slicer that tucks flat. The GC512's compact label is relative. It's compact compared to a full-size deli slicer, but not pocket size. Let's get practical. I used the slicer for 3 different tasks in a single weekend. First, a batch of turkey breast for a sandwich bar, about a pound of meat, sliced a 1/4 inch. The machine kept a consistent thickness, and the turkey didn't crumble. Second, I tackled a batch of zucchini ribbons for a summer pasta dish. The thin cut gave a delicate texture that a knife would have struggled to replicate evenly. Third, I tried shaving a block of aged cheddar for a gourmet burger. The gear-driven motor handled the dense cheese without bogging down, and the slices were uniform enough to melt perfectly on each patty. In each case,